Zenless Zone Zero was surprisingly fun, and I enjoyed my time with it so far. Is that a hot take though? Because it sure feels like it. Most of the CBT2 reviews that I've seen so far are kinda negative, and I do get why. A lot of the complaints they have are valid, and they talk about like genuine stumbling blocks for player experience, but I also feel like they're grossly overblown, at least in my opinion. So I kinda wanted to weigh in because this might shock you, but I'm actually the target audience for this game. So this video is going to be basically my opinion on my experience with the game so far, and I'm going to break this, basically a review, into sections so that you can zip right to whatever aspect of the game you care the most about. Starting with a quick overview of kind of like the game's feel and vibes, then I'm going to talk about like story, writing, characters, then I'm going to go off to gameplay land, talk combat, dungeons, overworld, that sort of thing, and finally I'll cover all the live service stuff like in-game currencies, summon systems, time commitment, and so on. This review is not comprehensive, and I'm not going to get too into the weeds about how every single game mechanic works, but I will leave some links to other videos that do that in the description in case that's what you're looking for. This review is also completely spoiler-free, barring some out-of-context footage of some very early game quests and cutscenes. If all that didn't scare you away and you're still here, hi, welcome. We're going to start the review now. I may mostly make Genshin Impact related content on this channel, but I'm actually a really big fan of games like the Shin Megami Tensei series. You might not recognize that name, but you've probably heard of or played its Persona spin-off series, and that's kind of what Zenless feels most inspired by in terms of the way the game is structured and its visual appeal. There's big bold colors, comic book style pop-outs, or just straight up comic panels in some places, plus that kinda retro techno aesthetic that you find in games like Eastward. But unlike SMT or the Persona series, Zenless doesn't really take itself too seriously, which I think is really good. The game has its darker, more serious moments, but the animations and characters are highly exaggerated with over-the-top movements and dialogue. A lot of people call this cringy, and that's fair enough, but Zenless feels purposeful in its cringe. Like, while I was playing through the game, I couldn't help but feel like I was actually playing a Studio Trigger film. And I love Studio Trigger stuff. Actually, one of the things I enjoy most about the types of stories and their presentation style that Studio Trigger and Zenless share is the contrast between those overdramatic, super exaggerated, near cringe moments throughout the story, and then the uncharacteristically quiet, serious, and emotional moments that follow. I kind of feel like that contrast really makes the serious moments more impactful. Contrast in tone is severely underrated in storytelling. Now, obviously, Zenless is still in its infancy, and the story isn't quite at the point where you're going to be able to have those serious scenes and still have them feel really impactful and have you invested in them. And I think that's okay for now. You can easily see all the little hints that suggest the writers want to go that route eventually, so I'm happy to give them time and just kind of let them cook. We'll talk a bit more about the writing in the next section though, so hold on. Now, the game's sound design is also quite good, although we're lacking a bit in terms of the number of tracks available in my opinion. But then again, Zenless is a game where new tracks are also really only going to play during story segments or in new dungeon exploration areas, so compared to a game like Genshin, which is open world and has a lot of areas, there are just less opportunities to push more tracks, I think. The tracks themselves are a really nice blend of jazz and hip-hop, and the character demos boast some really catchy theme songs with English lyrics. And I think a lot of people will get pretty sick of these tracks after a while, especially the ones in the TV sections, because right now the TV tracks are always the same, even when the combat music for the same level changes. This might be one of those more casual games where you maybe have the audio on for story segments, but if you're just doing your dailies or some side quests that are unvoiced, you might just mute the game and put on a podcast or something. Now, as far as the characters go, I do think a lot of them, visually at least, lack that certain magic that a lot of the Hoyo characters have that make them extremely unique and very memorable and identifiable. I can't quite put my fingers on why or what it is about them that makes me feel that way, but if I look at characters like Grace or Rina, I can confidently say that I like their designs, but they don't have that very striking presence that I'm accustomed to from a Hoyo character. I think this is an issue of more monochromatic color palettes with modernish clothing designs because some of the NPCs like Enzo and Elfie really pop and I love their designs. But overall, in my opinion, the game has a really great, consistent aesthetic all the way around, and that makes the game feel really polished, even for a beta. I'll rate the aesthetic at an 8 out of 10 because I think the UI needs a bit of help. I'm used to a bit more integrated UIs, and I also kind of want more music, so there's that. Now, my overall surface level rating aside, if you are familiar at all with my channel, you probably care most about my thoughts on the writing and the lore, since that's mostly what my channel focuses on. So, spoiler warning, my thoughts are mostly positive. I'm gonna keep this section mostly spoiler-free, so don't expect my opinion on specific moments in the story yet. I'm gonna wait until the game officially releases and before I get into all that, okay? The dialogue is tighter and it gets to the point faster, the plot is more focused, and everything you need to know is in the main quest rather than hidden in collectibles stuffed with cryptic lore somewhere. In fact, there are no lore-riddled collectibles in CBT2 that I could find, and I doubt there will be any in the final release, which is kind of a relief because while I like stumbling on these things in Genshin, it's very easy to get lost, overwhelmed, and extremely frustrated when seemingly important intel is squirreled away in some really obscure location somewhere. This kind of thing works for Genshin because it's a game about exploration and discovery, and it also kind of works for Star Rail because Star Rail has an enormous universe and it needs to develop that, so the collectibles almost become necessary. Zenless is more of a fighter game with puzzle portions, so I don't really think the lore-rich collectibles suit it very much. Just to be clear though, this style of writing that Zenless has is not better or worse than the more contextual style of writing found in Honkai Impact, Genshin, or Star Rail. It's just different and it appeals more to me specifically. I like it a lot more for ongoing games because it makes it much easier to remember what's going on over longer periods of time. Now, even though I've said that the writing in Zenless is faster, tighter, and a lot more direct in its delivery, a lot of people in CBT2 have said that the story is not gripping enough, and I personally think this is kind of a dumb take at this stage in the game since at its core, Zenless is structured to be so much like a Persona game, and games of that category are notorious for taking a long while to, quote, get to the good stuff. Again, this is not good or bad, that's just the way it is. Personally, I think games that try to get you too emotionally invested early on usually fail to do it well, unless the setting is one that you don't need a lot of context for. For example, The Last of Us, which everyone should be familiar with at this point, is based on a world that needs no introduction because it's our world. So you really only need to introduce the main characters, and then you can introduce the zombies, and everything else is pretty self-explanatory. And even then, the emotional connection at that point is more shock and awe than it is based on some kind of, I don't know, relationship that we have with our character. We haven't known them that long. How can we care about them, like for real? For a player to care about a completely unfamiliar world and the characters within it, we gotta get to know them, and that means spending time with them. So give the game some time and let the writers cook. And if you don't want to do that, well, guess what? This is great news for you because Zenless Zone Zero has a skip button. And it also has a rewatch feature, so you can watch all the stuff you skipped later when you get confused and actually want to care about the story. As for the characters themselves and how they're written, they're all pretty comical and really over the top, almost coming off as caricatures of common anime and game character tropes. But this doesn't really make them any less enjoyable, even if there's some level of cringe to them. These types of characters are really good at providing extreme contrast when the plot starts presenting serious scenarios. Watching a character who's always comically optimistic hit that breaking point where the world starts crumbling around them usually hits a lot harder than when the same thing happens to a character that takes everything seriously all the time. It's all about contrast. I'm going to say that so many times. And for that reason, I'm really optimistic about how the plot and the characters will develop. There's a lot they can do with this. Oh, right. One more thing I didn't mention is that the main characters, Wise and Belle, are not self-inserts. They are their own characters and they are completely voiced. An important thing to note, though, is that if you pick Wise, you're mostly going to be listening to dialogue from Belle and vice versa. And this is because the sibling you don't pick is the one who serves as your support, giving you instructions and updates. So if you really like Belle, you'll probably want to pick Wise. And if you really like Wise, you'll probably want to pick Belle. Anyway, as far as the writing goes for the game so far, I'm gonna give it a solid 7 out of 10 because while it's solid and I like it, it's a little shallow for right now. And while I do expect that to change as the story actually progresses and develops, I can't really rate the game based on what I think will happen because that's just silly. All right, let's talk about actually playing the game now. I actually quite like the gameplay. I think it's really well thought out. The combat system is actually deceptively deep. But I gotta warn you guys, the kind of game that you'll experience early on while your characters are still like under level 40 is not at all indicative of the kind of experience you're gonna have when your characters are maxed out. Early game and end game feel like two different games. But regardless, the average gameplay loop involves basically 3 things: navigating the overworld, which is basically just 6th Street right now, then TV puzzles, and zone-based combat. 6th Street is a pretty decent size for a hub area, and Hoyo's left themselves plenty of room to expand the street or give you access to other streets later on. But most of the stuff you're going to use this area for is easy to get to with very little walking. The video shop is basically your headquarters, and it lets you run the video store by putting out video recommendations and promoters in exchange for daily rewards, while also being the place you go to farm ascension and level up materials for characters and weapons, and where you go to access every mission and endgame mode. Outside the video shop, though, you have Enzo's store, which lets you upgrade and modify your Bangboos, which are little bunny robots that help you in combat and give you exploration bonuses within hollows. And you also have Elfie's shop, which is actually home to this game's artifact or relic system, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. We've also got the noodle and coffee shops where you can buy consumables that will give you drop boosts and stat enhancements, and once a day you can get a free coffee that gives you 60 free stamina, which brings your daily total from 180 to 240. The other 2 shops worth mentioning are the corner store, where you can buy talent level up materials instead of farming for them, and the engine shop, where you can buy, craft, and dismantle this game's equivalent of weapons. My only real complaint about this area is that Wise and Belle feel really slow compared to the agents within the hollows, and it often feels like there's almost an input lag when talking to people or interacting with the shops. It feels like very PS2 era to me, and I don't really know how else to explain it. The overworld UI is also kinda weird, and I don't know why they need the camera on a hotkey instead of my inventory or an agent list or even the summon screen. I don't see many instances where I'm actually gonna want to take a photo on 6th Street instead of inside of a hollow, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Now, most of the negativity I've seen for this game is around the TV sections, which is where the game puts all of its puzzles. Now, I actually really like the TV sections, but I agree that in the early game there are far more TV sections than combat sections, which makes it feel really unbalanced, especially if you're like me and you like to do all of the side quests. I do think it's really important that the TV sections are there, though, because they're a really nice palate cleanser between fighting sections, which helps to keep the combat from feeling too stale from overexposure. People who are much farther into the game than I am, because my playtime has been a wee bit limited this past couple of weeks, they've shared that late game has a much better balance of TV zones versus combat, so this is probably only an early game issue. But if you really hate the TV stuff, this game might just not be for you, because the TV navigation is built right into the lore of the game, and I don't think they're going to remove it completely, even if they reduce the amount of time that it takes. The puzzles themselves aren't that hard, though, but they are hard enough that you'll have to engage your brain at least a little bit if you want to 100% them. These sections remind me a lot of games like Persona Q, especially like that one level with the creepy babies that chase you. As for combat, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about how the combat works, because I'm not really a min-maxing theory crafter, but Woba Certified has made a great objective video on this topic that I will link if you want that kind of intel. I'm only really going to talk about how the game feels to me, what I like, and what I don't. First off, the combat is not like Genshin's. It's more like Honkai Impact's. There's no elemental reactions, healers do not exist, you cannot use consumables in combat, and I haven't seen much in the way of defensive utilities like shields. The game's combat mostly revolves around attack combos, dodging, character assists, and stun locking the enemy. Now, this makes fights really fast-paced and reaction-reliant, and because Zenless isn't an open world like Genshin, you cannot run from these fights. You gotta win, and you've only got 3 characters and a Bangbu to work with. In the early game, so like character levels 1 through 50-ish, I think, you can kind of get away with just button mashing because the enemies are really basic and your characters don't have full access to all of their abilities. Just like Genshin and Star Rail, some special abilities, which can be the core mechanic of a character's kit, can't even be unlocked until a certain ascension level. This makes supports especially feel really, really bad in the early game, so you'll probably play the first few hours of the game with only hyper-offensive units. But not having full access to character kits might be why there are more TV sections in the early game than combat sections. You just can't unlock the good stuff yet. But as you progress and your characters get built, combat becomes much more interesting and, dare I say, difficult. Well, I mean, difficulty is a relative metric, but if you get frustrated with real-time combat games like Bayonetta, then you might struggle a little bit with Zenless. Late-game fights really force you to learn your character's mechanics properly and how and when to swap. You gotta nail your dodge times, although it's pretty forgiving against most enemies, and you really have to pay attention. The lack of healing access also means you can't undo damage taken, so if you're not great at dodging, you're probably going to find yourself playing a lot more cautiously and kiting enemies to take them down. But the game accounts for this too. Characters don't just have elements, they also have different damage attributes. For example, every attack is classified as either slash, strike, or pierce. Slash abilities are for stuff like swords and other blades, pierce abilities are more for like bullets and maybe spears, while strike is for like hammers, fists, and all that kind of bashy stuff. Different types of enemies are weak to different damage attributes, so if you can't dodge well and you want to kite an enemy, chances are you're going to be locked into a ranged unit that uses bullets that deal pierce damage, and if that enemy is resistant to pierce, then you're in for a really long fight. Elements are a bit similar to attributes, except they have their own special effects. For example, the electric element can apply shock, which deals damage over time. Get an enemy that's weak to the same element and attribute of your active character, and you'll be doing quite a bit of damage. It's very noticeable, and I really like the ability to have these combos quite a bit. I think this is one method that they're going to use to incentivize people to build and use more characters, and that's something that we'll cover in the Gacha section. Overall, however, combat feels really smooth, polished, and satisfying. Although, and maybe I'm too used to games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, but I don't always find it very clear when a character has successfully completed a specific combo. The combat is so fast and fluid that I feel like a lot of the combos kind of like bleed into each other. I would really love to see more on-screen indicators that a certain combo technique or trigger has been achieved, like maybe the attack button changes or the skill button pulses, or you get some kind of text pop up like the critical strike exclamation marks near the character. There's certainly space in the UI to do this, so I kind of hope they implement it, but I'm not too hopeful. But on the topic of the combat UI, I don't really like it that much. I think the whole points thing in the top left is pretty useless because I'm just never looking at it and it feels kind of irrelevant to whatever it is I'm doing when I'm in combat. I would much rather have a meter on the right-hand side instead that steadily increases the closer I get to being able to use my ultimate. I feel like that's more intuitive when you're in the heat of the moment, you know? But I do really like the combat sound design because most characters have contextual lines that play when certain conditions in combat are met or when certain characters are in the team. For example, if you run Nicole with Billy or Anby, she'll have special lines that reference them by name when she swaps on or off field. It definitely makes the characters feel more connected to each other, and I really like that kind of thing. Now, like Genshin and Star Rail, Zenless also has a relic or artifact system that they call tracks, and this has its own quirks. Instead of farming each set individually though, you farm a special currency that you then take over to Elfie's shop. From there you can set conditions for your randomized track drops, like which track type you want, or what track number or what slot you want to pull for. The amount of currency is going to vary depending on how many conditions you select, and this can be kinda nice for min-maxing builds in late game since you can pick your piece a lot easier. But you also have more slots to fill. There are 6 slots in total, so again, more tracks are needed overall, but I kind of like this better than only having 5 slots like you do in Genshin, where you can only have 2 2-piece bonuses or 1 4-piece bonus, because 6 slots lets you have 1 2-piece bonus and 1 4-piece bonus, or 3 2-piece bonuses. You still gotta roll for substats, but I like any sort of quality of life thing that can help remove at least one element of RNG, you know? I'm gonna rate combat and all of the combat related things as an 8 out of 10 for late game and a 6 out of 10 for early game. We're gonna see how that score holds up over time. Now let's talk about all the less fun live servicey stuff. I'm gonna start with some more subjective things like character pull value. In any game where skill expression through reaction time is a thing, pull values for characters go way up because you can basically compensate for stuff like lower stats by just playing the game really well. Turn-based systems are far more reliant on raw numbers, which means you're probably gonna end up pulling more characters more often. Zenless has a much smaller roster, which I expect to grow more on the slow side of things because it'll take players more time to get familiar with the characters that they already have and, you know, how to play them. Especially because the game doesn't really tell you a lot of the hidden mechanics that these characters have. Theory crafters are going to have a field day just messing around with different button combos to figure out what characters can do. And as people get more skilled with the characters that they have, they'll be able to justify not pulling for newer characters unless they really like them. Now for this reason, I expect the summon currency income to be on the lower end of things. That said, this game has more types of things to pull for than other games. You'll have a standard banner, a limited banner, and I'm gonna guess there will be banners for both limited bang boos and engines. Although those are not available right now in CBT2, so I can't comment on them beyond the speculation. Now this could skew my income estimates by quite a bit, so I'm not gonna crunch any numbers based on my current playthrough. I think that number will be kind of useless. Banners themselves, though, seem to work exactly like they do in Genshin or Star Rail, with the S rank rate up being on a 50-50 chance to get at about 75 to 80 pulls. And if you lose the 50-50, you're guaranteed your next one. If you do lose, you're gonna get one of the S rank standard characters instead. Now, like I said, there are no engine or bang boo banners available right now, so I can't comment on how those will work, or even if they'll exist, although I assume they will, because why would they not? As a personal preference, I tend to like lower income gacha games with higher pull values on characters, so this suits me just fine. But if you're someone who likes to pull a lot and frequently, you might have a problem with this. I also haven't seen anything that resembles a battle pass unless that's been merged together with these little daily missions that we have right now, so I can't really talk about anything like that. I guess I could rate the gacha and summon income kind of stuff, but I don't really want to, because why would I rate a microtransaction mechanic? That's weird. What's less silly is time requirements. On the whole, Zenless feels pretty respectful of my time so far, something I appreciate as a very busy working adult. The daily missions are really easy things like spend 160 stamina, drink a coffee, buy an item at the shop, etc., so they're really fast to knock out if you don't have much time to play daily. I think they take a little bit more time than Star Rail's dailies, but a little bit less time than Genshin, so it's somewhere in between there. Time required is really going to depend a bit on you and what you actually want to accomplish that day. If you don't need to farm anything, then Zenless is going to take less time than both Genshin and Star Rail. But if you're gonna farm stuff, what you farm changes how much time is needed. This is mostly because of how they set up farming in-game. To get materials and money, you gotta go to a VR headset in the video shop, and from there, you can custom craft your own domain. If you wanna farm for money, 3 types of Ascension items and EXP materials at the same time in the same run, you can do that. But you're gonna have to be a little bit careful about your stamina management, because if you wanna play any story content, you gotta budget for it, because those story missions and side quests all cost stamina to play. You can hold about 180 stamina at any given time, but you can also get an additional 60 stamina every day for free by grabbing a coffee at the local shop, so you'll have about 240 stamina every day on average to work with if you only log in once a day. Personally, I don't mind this that much because the rewards for doing missions are actually pretty good, but I do think that the stamina costs for some story missions get a bit high as you go on, so it's just something to keep in mind. You don't notice it early game, you will notice it later. Now, as far as I can tell, talent materials aren't farmed, they're bought at the corner store and they reset once a day. That means it doesn't cost you stamina, but you are going to be a little bit time gated on them. I'm kind of okay with this because if you're pulling for less characters, you're going to have more time to stockpile materials, and unlike Genshin and Star Rail, there's not a huge variety in the talent level up materials you're gonna need. Every character's talent level materials is determined by whatever element they are. Zenless also has something like a roguelike mode, which serves as a sort of endgame for it, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't really had a chance to dig into it much because I'm a bit too underleveled to be able to kind of review it properly, and because I've just been busy. So I'm gonna give this game a solid 9 out of 10 for respecting my time as a working adult. Someone with way more spare time than me or who plays games for a living will probably give this more like a 5 out of 10 for lack of current replayability, but you know, different folks look for different things in games, so take that with a grain of salt. Overall, I'm actually pretty happy with Zenless Zone Zero. It's a fun, fast-paced, quirky game with an appealing retro techno aesthetic, good music, entertaining cast, and a very casual, friendly design. It's got some small problems, and the early game is quite a bit slower than I think the late game will be. But that's kind of expected, so I'm not really worried about it. Will this be a huge blockbuster hit like Genshin? I kinda doubt it. It's targeting a pretty niche audience, it does a lot of fighting game appeal, and it doesn't have nearly the mass appeal that Genshin does. Genshin kind of pioneered a very unique genre of live service games that's got its own core audiences in titles like Wuthering Waves, Punishing Grey Raven, and Project Mugen. I don't think Zenless even compares. Personally, I can only handle one open world live service game at a time, so I'm glad Zenless is zone-based because I've really liked my time with it so far, and I do intend to play it when it actually comes out. But that's all just my opinion. What do you guys think? Did you get into the beta? Have you been watching other people test it out? Or is this the first time you've even heard about the game? Let me know in the comments because I'm actually quite curious. Now, special thanks to my channel members for all their support, and another special thanks to you for watching. I'll see you next time.